Yes, sir. I did have the chance to catch up with CFO Ruth Porat. We talked about the quarter, some other issues. One was just a question about this big bottom line beat, 14.21 versus the expectation of 11.30. Ruth Porat talked simply about the operating performance, called out the strength in sites that would include search and YouTube. Talked about the strong growth in that other segment, so that's cloud and play. Obviously, we'll see on the call if we get some more metrics about how that cloud business is performing. We did talk as well about, listen, Google, like many other tech giants, is clearly under this increasing regulatory scrutiny. And I did ask Ruth Porat how she feels about that scrutiny. Some analysts believe her company is a primary target, just given their market share in search. On that topic, Ruth Porat telling us that they are already subject to oversight in a number of areas. She emphasized that this is not new for the company, she told me, and that they have been engaged with regulators around the globe for quite some time. Switching gears, we did also talk about Huawei. That's interesting because Google's phones use that Android operating system, but apparently it's now Huawei has trademarked its own smartphone OS operating system. And I asked Ruth Porat, how do you think about that? They make that move. How does that impact your company potentially? If you try to quantify that on that issue, Ruth Porat saying, listen, we are focused right now on protecting the users. Those who are using those Huawei devices right now. It is still, she said, an open item. And finally, we talked about M&A. And listen, I think that's an interesting question. If you're under more scrutiny from regulators, does that change how you think about M&A? Does that mean you're less likely to do big, meaningful M&A in the future just because you're under what appears to be a tighter microscope? On that subject, on M&A, Ruth Porat saying the acquisitions are additive and we are open to them where they make sense. There's a lot we are doing there organically, though, as well. And finally, guys, I did talk to her about Peter Thiel, of course, the billionaire investor and Facebook board member. We know he recently ripped into Google, reportedly said that Google should be federally investigated for these allegedly aiding the Chinese military. Did not get an answer from her on that issue. Guys, back to you.
Josh, thanks very much for that. Some great insight. Let's get reaction. Tom Forte, what's your take on, in particular, the comments there that Ruth Porat's not that threatened by regulatory oversight? Do you think that's something that's going to take some value out of the stock? And what's your call overall, bullish or bearish?
Yep, so I'm bearish, and some great stuff there. I do think that regulatory risk for Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google is the most significant risk for those companies. If you look at the 10-year period where Microsoft was dead money, essentially the antitrust case and regulatory risk took a big bite out of Microsoft. So I think it's something investors have to pay a lot of attention to, regardless, really, of what the CFO says.